Well, thank you all for being here today. I am still trying to maneuver myself with Teams here because I'm more of a Zoom girl. So I'm better equipped on knowing how to operate with Zoom, but we will give it our best shot today. And I believe the recording has already started, so we will go ahead and call the meeting to order at 1:01 p.m. Let's see, today is December 16th. This is the meeting for the Bylaws and Resolutions Advisory Committee. And my name is Laura Pangratz, and I am the chairperson for this committee. What I would like to do is take an opportunity at the beginning of all of our meetings, whether they're in person or all virtual, is to take a moment for those who may want to watch this later to know who we are, even though I know virtually we have our names on our squares. Hopefully my ring light won't. There we go. Come on now. So as I said, my name is Laura. I am the chairperson for this committee. Keith, would you introduce yourself, please?
Keith Kaiser, 28 Moonshell.
Okay. Our other committee member is Augie. Would you introduce yourself?
August Flengy, 17 Driftwood. Hi.
Okay. Thank you. I don't know. I thought Pam was going to be here, but we do have another committee member, Pam. Oh, there she is. Welcome, Pam. We're just introducing ourselves. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good. Okay. My name's Pam Ferendi, and we've had a home in the Pines since 1991. And this is my first experience on any committees in the Ocean Pines community. Mm-hmm. So, and we retired here in 2015.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us. Let's see. And then we have our board liaison. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Steve Jacobs. I am, as said, board liaison, and I want to compliment Augie on his hat. It looks very nice.
Yeah, I forgot my hat initially. I remembered it when I saw the sweaters.
Yes. I've got my Christmas shirt on too. So, and look, Mr. Doug's got his sweater on. Perfect. Doug, would you like to introduce yourself? You're muted though.
Hi, it's Doug Parks. I'm on the board of directors, not a committee member, but was asked to sit in on this meeting because there's an item on the agenda that requires some discussion, and looking forward to it.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Welcome. We do have quorum. Bob, our fifth member, is away on vacation, so we will get him back in, at a future meeting. So for right now, hopefully, we will get through all of this fairly quickly, but we will try to most definitely be done by 3 o'clock. One of the reasons we're all virtual today, for those who may see this later, is that there were some renovations done at the admin building, plus it's the holiday party for the staff, and so there was really nobody there to let us in. And due to all the germs out there, it doesn't hurt to keep us all healthy, for the holidays and meet virtually. So I thank you for being willing to do that. And so the next item is that we need to approve our agenda. Now, since Josh, our awesome tech guy, is usually the one who pulls up documents. I'm going to attempt to do this. He and I did a test run, so bear with me as we do this. And then hopefully we can still see the information and communicate. I'm not sure how well I'll be able to see everybody, so if you have comments, you may have to just speak up and all of that kind. So work with me on that. Okay, so let me see if I can figure out how to do this. Share content. So we're going to. I think I'm going to go here. Okay. Can you see the agenda?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. I can't see any of you now due to my screen, but we will. Okay, if I do it that way, I can see you. Okay, but please look at the agenda and let me know if you see anything that needs to be added or corrected on it. Some of this is some of this I have on here because I wasn't exactly sure where we need to put on our status for some, so I kind of just listed all of it. We may not go through all of it today, so. Let me know if you have any additions or corrections. Okay, hearing none, the agenda will be approved as presented. Okay, so then the next item for approval is our minutes from our last meeting, which let's see if I can figure out how to make this any bigger. Is that big enough for everybody?
That looks good.
Okay. We'll kind of just scroll through it. I had sent these out previously. Did anyone find any corrections or anything that needs to be added to the minutes from our last meeting, which was held on October 21st?
I didn't see any.
Okay.
The version you emailed did not have those comments on it still. Do we? We should probably take those out, I assume, from the approved version.
Okay. I'll have to figure out how to do that. Or maybe Augie, if you resend it to me without the comments in there, then I can save it that way.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Because I don't want to.
You did send a version around in a PDF that had no comments. So.
Gotcha. Okay.
Augie, were your comments addressed?
I'm not sure if we did have any communication on any of that.
I don't think we did, but I think if the agenda as written looks good, it sort of answers the comments. I think they were basically questions on whether we needed to put more details in.
Okay. Okay. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes from the previous meeting as presented, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. Okay, back to the agenda. Okay. It does not look like, and correct me if I'm wrong, do we have any other guests other than us that would like to make a public comment? I don't see anybody else right now. Right? Okay. All right. So I'm going to go back to that. All right. So my chairman's person's report is was attached to the bottom of the agenda. I watched the replay of the November 19th directors meeting. I attended virtually the Teams, on Teams, the Ocean Pines Association executive. I don't think I finished writing that one. Executive committee meeting, because I forgot to put the date on there, whatever date that was. I have sent the emails to our liaison about some of those previous charging documents, and did communicate with the elections committee, I believe, yeah. And then task still to come is to attend the directors meeting tomorrow. I will take a moment to share again personally with all of you that having taken over as chairperson kind of started off a little bit rocky for me, considering that at the end of October, my family and we did get COVID and everything. And if those, I know all of you are pretty much aware, but you know, my son was in the hospital for about 10 days, and he did pass away on the 11th. So I have mentally taken a little bit of a break from all of this to get through some of that. So I'm trying my best to get back into the swing of things. It's a nice distraction, but I want to personally thank each of you for being understanding in why we needed to cancel our November meeting. And I'm thankful that you were all willing to wait and meet in December. So we are taking things one day at a time. My husband and I will remain full-timers here in Ocean Pines. We are going back to our other house in Hartford County tomorrow through Christmas. But then we'll be back here full time again. So I just wanted to, you know, again, thank you for the kindness and the understanding and the patience with me. I'll have my good days and my bad days, but right now we are going to focus on the lovely topic of bylaws and resolutions. And that will be, it's an entertaining topic, right? So we will get away from that part of the stuff, but I wanted to include that in my report for you. Back to the agenda. At this time, I kind of like to be able to, and last month, Steve was not able to join us for I should say, our October meeting. And what I had kind of thought in our meetings that it would be nice to, if, as I give a report of the things that I have done in between our meetings, it would be maybe helpful or a way to bridge the communication with our liaison and us as a committee to give Steve an opportunity, purely optional, if you have any updates before we get to the meat of the meeting. If you have any kind of a report or updates you would like to give us at this time.
Thanks, Laura. I don't really, I think your agenda covers just about everything that I think I need to deal with. I did review the video from the October meeting. I guess I'd make 2 points. One is going back to the governing document that Keith circulated. I'm guessing because I do not have all of the charging documents that were listed in that document. And I am assuming that it probably got lost in the transition between the election, the change on board liaisons, the change in chairs and everything else. We may just have to try to catch up on some of the paperwork. The other thing is, and I am fine, and we can cover that when we get to the governing document, is if you want, rather than hold Doug up, I would at least suggest that maybe we should take whatever needs to be discussed with M08 up now, get it dealt with, and then we can get into the other stuff as well. That would be my suggestion.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So each time we have a meeting, Steve, if you have things to update, that's you will have an opportunity to share. Okay. So as we look at the agenda, I am very flexible when going through an agenda and more than willing to go kind of out of order, which is more my natural instinct anyway. But at least I need to have everything listed somewhere on the agenda so I don't forget what we need to go back and cover. If everyone else is okay, then M08, which is the topic that we wanted to go over and include and get Doug's input on, we can go ahead and discuss that. I pulled that up here. I won't read it all for you. And Keith, Bob's not here, but Keith, you all maybe have to help me refresh my memory on what were the issues, or Doug, I don't know how you would like to start with this. What are the concerns about the changes? What do we need to update? All of that. Where would you like to start the discussion?
Thank you, Laura. And I assume we're suspending Robert's Rules of Order to allow me to speak. So
yes,
that's my pet peeve. Yeah. So a couple of things came up. Number one, it's actually a sort of a two-pronged approach. Number one, you've got Resolution M08, which lists a number of manuals that are supposed to be kept up to date and are part of the policy side of the organization. Then you've got if you look at the list, if you go down to the next page of M08 on your screen there, you'll see that even though it's the wrong way, you've got two. You've got OPA, the Financial Management Procedures Manual, and you've got OPA Financial Management Policy Manual. All right, and it was our contention sort of twofold. The number one, one is clearly operational. All right, and should not be. We wanted to at least get the committee's opinion on whether or not that should be as part of the policy. The sentiment here, at the very least, is saying that financial procedures should be held within the sort of the purview of the general manager, as he or she may end up changing that every now and then based on the conditions they encounter and so on and so forth, and as the organization evolves. But more importantly, the financial policy manual was last updated in April 2006. And so I went through it several months ago, basically reformatted it and put in a lot of suggestions because, clearly from the language that was there in 2006 and today, a number of things have changed. We went through and did, I passed it along after talking to my board colleagues, passed it along to the Budget and Finance Committee and said, guys, here are some suggested changes. Please look into this. Provide some feedback, because the next group that's going to look at this is the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee. So we just wanted to take, basically, and I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong because I'm looking at it, Laura and others, did I send you the copy of the financial policy manual that had both the board comments and the comments from BNF? Okay, so I will do that.
I don't recall. Yeah.
Okay, then I will do that. That's an oversight on my part, and I apologize. But in essence, basically, it's a almost complete document at this point, and we just wanted to have the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee look at it. Basically, the change that I see, unless the committee thinks otherwise, is to remove the item under the under the list of manuals that says financial management policy manual. I'm sorry, financial management procedures manual. Take that out of there because it's no longer a policy, and then move that out to the to again under the purview of the general manager. And then the second thing is we just want to let you know that we've unless somebody else changes anything or you get a look at the financial policy manual and recommend any additional changes. We're going to bring that up. I want to hopefully in the January meeting to actually adopt the financial policy manual because those changes have been made. So, but if you need another month for that, and we don't do it until February because you want some time for review, that's fine as well. But the target is to get that up and running and authorized by no later than February. So I will send this information over to you, Laura. I'll send it to you right now, as a matter of fact, because I'm looking at the email that I'd sent to directors. And it's there's two attachments, policy manual with the original one with the board comments, and the other one is revision 1 that's got information with comments and so on and so forth. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Is there any other, Keith? Do you have any comments or anything?
Well, I guess I have some questions. So M08 is a requirement to periodically review these manuals. But it's the responsibility. It's not the bylaws committee's responsibility to review or approve these manuals, right. Because they're different types of expertise, they're different types of employment, different people within the manager, whomever. It would be their manual. So first question would be, should we be reviewing manuals of any kind for any reason other than the for example, the Budget and Finance Committee or the manuals that the manager would use? I don't know if that's part of our charter, number one. And number two, back to the original question of M08, which was, does M08 serve a purpose? Because the initial thinking was that some of these manuals have not been reviewed or updated in a long, long time. And does that mean that M08, even serves a purpose anymore? And so our initial recommendation to the board was to do away with M08 in its entirety and just let the people who own those manuals, the manager, budget and finance, whomever, to update and maintain them. But then the board, and I think this is what Doug's point was, came back and said, well, in particular, these financial manuals are important. And we want to make sure that we don't lose track of these somehow. Right. So I guess I'm just bringing the discussion back around to, are we keeping M08 because of these financial manuals? Or what exactly are we saying here? So I'm just not clear really where we are with the initial question. Over.
Good answer, Keith. So Keith, good, very good questions. So number one of the things that can come back from a committee is to basically say what you said, and the recommendation from the committee is that we don't need to be involved in reviewing the details associated with these manuals. I always offer the committees to get involved as a professional courtesy, and that and it's perfectly legitimate for the committee to come back and say, no, we're fine, we really don't need to be involved in that level, and that it served the purpose of informing the committee, and then obviously the committee informing the board saying, no, we're fine with what's going on, we don't see that as our role, and that's perfect. That's fine. The second part of it was with regard to keeping M08. I would just throw out for consideration that one of the things I've always thought about in my tenure on the board is sustainability. Okay, in other words, how do we make sure we sustain these things across different transitions, both at the committee level and at the board level? And to me, obviously, the documentation clearly is a vehicle we could use that. So even though it may be dormant's not the right word. Passive maybe is the right word for this resolution. The idea would be, at the very least, it could always be referenced at some point in time to say, number one, are these manuals still relevant? And number two, if they are, when's the last time that they got reviewed? And the idea would be, based on what I think I hear you saying, Keith, and maybe the committee also agrees, that it's not the committee's responsibility to do that. It's the committee's responsibility to let everybody know that M08 still exists, and those who are responsible for looking at those particular manuals need to get involved at some point in time. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, I sorry, Steve, just real quick. Copy everything that you just said. I think one of the other issues, I'm trying to remember, Jim is actually the one who first brought this up. So I'm trying to remember what he said. But I think another issue was that there are some manuals that are not on here on this list. And some of the manuals on this list are no longer called what we called them here.
Right.
So I think there was also just a general administrative question about, do we specifically want to list the manuals that we're talking about, or do we just want to say in general and give them like a generic name, like any budget or finance manuals, for example, instead of listing the specific ones? I think that was a question too in the beginning.
Yeah.
Again,
that's what I do remember, that there was a question about if it's not called the same thing, or how specific, how do we leave that title on there if it's not a relevant manual anymore? Maybe two manuals have been combined now into one standard issue. So I do remember that being one of our conversations. Keith, Steve, what did you want to add?
Ordinarily, as liaison, I would not be involved in this discussion, but
right. But you were committee member then.
But I do. When I was a member of the committee, my recollection is, and Keith, you're right. Jim Trummel was the guy who raised the issue of M08, and my recollection is his initial view was M08 was not necessary, primarily because of what Doug had mentioned, which is almost all these manuals are not policy driven, they're operational. And so you fall under the umbrella of the general manager. And it's up to him as part of his duties to keep those manuals up to date. The other thing I'll remind everybody of is when we did the package of bylaws changes, there were, I want to say two, there might have been three changes to the bylaws, where the bylaws had originally stated a specific title of a manual, and we had to change it to a more generic subject matter. So to that degree, they sort of tied in. Those sort of got glommed together. Again, my recollection is that Jim indicated, and I don't know whether he had a conversation with Doug or it came up during a board meeting prior to my election to the board. I'm not quite sure what the chronology is, but that there was an expression that the two financial manuals perhaps should not be included in whatever ultimately is decided in M08, and it was Jim's view that we didn't need M08 at all. And I think that's where we are. And what I'm hearing Doug say, and Doug, if I'm wrong, please tell me. What I'm hearing Doug say is, in particular, as to the policy manual, there is a requirement to keep that up to date. The other manuals that, however they're listed here by title or by generic subject, those fall under the umbrella of the general manager. And that being the case, if we're going to keep M08, we may want to limit it just to the financial policy manual. That's just a thought, but that's sort of my recollection of the history. So,
okay, Doug.
So yeah, Steve, that's an agreement. Actually, Jim and I had a discussion a long time ago about this when we first brought the subject up, and the idea of, do we really need to keep M08? Well, if you look, and I'm kind of reading these things sideways here, but of all the ones that are listed, I would say the only ones that really have any kind of policy implications are obviously the OPA Financial Policy Manual and the Architectural Review Committee one. I would look at those as separate because they would involve board level decisions if any changes were needed to be made. So I'd want to preserve them separately. But to your point about getting rid of the other manuals, I certainly would if I had a vote at the, if it gets up to the board level, that M08 would not be needed for those operational manuals. That was something that would be kept in there. So the idea of preserving the policy side of it, and that's again those two I mentioned, ARC and the financial policy manual. So if the vehicle to keep those in perpetuity is leaving M08 the way it is and just having those two in there, or taking those two and putting them somewhere else within our governing documents, that's what I would look to the committee to say, guys, what do you suggest? At the end of the day, not having another option, I would look at just saying, all right, well, if we're based on the discussions and the guidance from Jim Trummel, get rid of all the ones that were operationally appropriate, and just leave the other two that are policy based in there and have a go at it. But again, that's why it's at the committee level.
Doug, if I could just ask you real quick, would it strike you as the appropriate vehicle just to amend M08 so that we captured those two manuals only within the language of M08 and leave it at that?
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility, because again, the argument could be that there's no board involvement in the employee handbook. Okay, and if something had to change in the employee handbook, it would follow the normal course of the GM coming to the board saying, hey, I want to do the X, Y, and Z, like when we changed the benefit stuff. So that will take care of itself, because it's more of an active rather than a passive policy approach. Okay. So yes, I certainly, if you were held my feet to the fire, simply amending M08 and removing everything but the two manuals we talked about would certainly be appropriate.
Keith?
Would it be appropriate, or I don't know if there's other examples where we've done this, like for example, the ARC committee guidelines, amending that to C02 so that when C02 comes up for review, that it would include the guidelines themselves? Is that, I don't know if there's other examples where that's been done, where a manual is attached to the governing document, but is that any reason we couldn't do that? Or
yes, in my opinion, there's no reason that you couldn't do that. I guess one of the thoughts at the time, back I guess when they first wrote M08, was to try to get all of the different manuals into one spot, so that one person could take one look and see across the board, where you would have to be intimately familiar with all the resolutions and say, hey, in the C resolutions there's one or two that have policy manuals associated. In the F resolutions there's one or two that have the policy. So maybe that was a thought at the time. I certainly don't see any issue with that. But if maybe from a sense of practicality, the framework for M08 is already here, and I don't see that it would be problematic to just leave those two in there. As a way to sustain as the the makeup of the boards and the committees change over time.
Yeah, I agree with that. This may be just simpler than we thought.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask one more question? And I guess I would. I would like, and I want to go through the proper channels. I'll have Steve advise me when this happens. But did I hear that you guys, from a committee perspective, don't feel it's necessary for you to review the financial policy manual?
If you're referring to my comments, that's not necessarily what I meant. I guess what I meant is it a requirement that we have to? Certainly as a courtesy, or if any of the other committees were to send something to our committee, because, what we do is sort of administrative in nature, looking at language and such, I'm not opposed to that. When asked, I guess my point was, or my question was, are we required to? Is somebody required to submit to us their manual for us to look at it?
Okay. No, I don't think it's. I'm sorry. If you were asking it to me, I don't think it's a requirement. Laura, I just emailed you the documents.
Okay, great. Thank you. I would say if we're reviewing any documents or manuals, our job would just to make sure that nothing in those manuals goes against any of the policies that we have in the bylaws and resolutions part of it. We're not approving, oh, hey, this method works well in finances. You know, that's not our role there. So if that's all you're asking is for us to potentially possibly review some manuals just to make sure everything's consistent between our own policies in the bylaws, that I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah, the issue of cross-referencing materials to make sure nothing's stepping on something else. So yes.
Right. Because we don't want somebody using language then that goes inadvertently and maybe not intentionally goes against what was already in the bylaws, that we can't do this because the bylaws say this. So yeah, we would just need to know then, is that something that and I guess we would have to establish some type of, like you said, you're forwarding the financial stuff to us, but if there were other manuals like ARC or whatever, is there a schedule? How often? Because my brain is not, I'm not as good as Jim when it comes to pulling all that kind of information. But I don't recall right off the top of my head, is there a schedule of how often the manuals need to be redone, you know, to at least be looked at like we do our bylaws, you know? And the resolutions and stuff like that. Is there a time schedule? So like if we review the financial ones this year, does that mean we don't need to look at it again unless there's a new GM 5 years from now and they want to redo the manual, and then have them present it back just to make sure nothing policy, you know, conflicts? That would be, I think, something we would just need to make a note of.
Yeah, I know of no schedule per se. Obviously, if we were following a schedule and the financial policy manual wasn't updated since 2006, I think somebody, I don't want to say dropped the ball. It just wasn't top of mind for a very long time. So, but no, I don't see that. And I would, again, Laura, to your point, where most of these manuals, save for the two we talked about, are operational in nature. The onus would be on the general manager and his team to do any updates. And I think that's event driven rather than date driven. You know, or situational driven, where, you know, say a new law comes into effect and so on and so forth about, you know, payroll policy or something like that. You know, that would, you know, sort of spawn a, you know, a change to the manuals, which we wouldn't need to necessarily be involved in. But
so, Laura, could you scroll back up to the first page of this?
Down further, or
no, that's fine.
Have it in there. Okay.
Biannual schedule. So I'm just, I'm going back to my military days when one of the jobs I was in, I was responsible for a lot of instructions, like thousands of them. And one of the principles and this was the Navy, that they had was that an instruction or a manual that had not been reviewed or updated for X period of time basically should be considered suspect, because time moves on, technology moves on, and things change. And that essentially, you know, when you change or update a manual, you change the issue date on it. So you resubmit, you republish the manual with whatever changes with a new issue date. And so the way it was done in that situation was the issue date could never be any older than, let's say, 6 years. And if it was older than 6 years, it was considered suspect. And in some cases, not even an authority anymore. It couldn't be used as an authority anymore. So it would seem to me that you know, from a sustainability standpoint, that maybe this MO8 would serve as a vehicle to, if we wanted to do something like that, to say every, you know, these manuals or association manuals in general can never be more than X number of years old. You know, the issue date can never be more than X number of years old. I mean, you may review it, look through it, and say it's all still good, and just republish it with a new date.
Right.
But
Document
odds
it. That lets people know that you have looked at it. Yeah.
right. But odds are, if let's say you were to pick 5 years or 6 years, things will have changed. Maryland law will have changed that affects some things. We know we deal with that all the time, right? There could be local laws or ordinance that have changed. There, who knows, right? So I don't know. Maybe it's something we need to consider here if we're going to keep M08. And let's just say that the only two manuals it specifically references are the financial ones, but within the body of the resolution here, we say that in general, no authoritative manual used by Ocean Pines, operational authorities can be more than have an issue date more than X number of years old. What do you think of that?
I would be for that. I think that's a good policy routine to get in habit with, simply because in this world no one stays in their position for like 20 years. We're not going to have the same GM for 20 years, more than likely, right? So every time you get a new general manager, at bare minimum, they should be looking at these manuals. And if they realize it hasn't been done, but I think if we give them some kind of guideline, like you said, 5 years, I think 5 years is a good mark, 3 to 5, something, like that. That's one of their tasks that they have on their calendar of, okay, what do I have to do when I take over this job, or if they're in the job for 10 years, then they go, well, they did it when they first started and they're going to do it again midway, so I do like the idea of incorporating somehow, just like we do with the other stuff, having renewal dates put in there, so that if our members and anybody questions, it will be noted that something has been looked at. And even if there are no changes, we're at least stating that there were no recommended changes at this time. And you can always update something even within those. You don't only do it just every 5 years. You can do it at any point within those 5 years, but bare minimum, you need to do it.
So I think, Augie, unless you've got any objections to something of that nature, that we could just put on the agenda for us to draft up a version of this M08 that represents our thinking and then incorporates, Doug's input here, and then send that back to the board for their consideration. What do you think?
My only input is I think there's some downsides to a sort of sunset approach as well that I think need to be talked over and thought about. If the sunset passes, what is the status of the manual? Is it void? Is it something you still look to? There's some risk there, and it does tend to create sort of the potential to create an emergency if the sunset's coming and no one's sort of looked at it for a while, and now we're in emergency posture. So that's based on my experience with government for 30 years. But, it's worth talking about, I think.
Right. Pam, do you have any thoughts on any of this?
No, not really. I'm sort of in a listening mode to see where things are going.
Right. No, that's perfect. That's how I felt when I first joined the committee too. So, but just don't ever feel like you can't pop in and, give a thought or opinion. So I think that's good. We can mark that in, that we will add this for our future agenda as well. Keith, is there anything more on that, or I'm not sure at what status we should wrap this part of the discussion up on from M08?
Well, our previous status on M08 was basically that we were waiting to hear from Doug to get his input. So we received that today. So I think this just becomes, we're not going to solve this today, it just becomes an agenda item for our next meeting to kind of drill down into this, make sure we talk it through thoroughly, and then, redline something that we can then send back for people to look at.
Okay. All right. Discussion. I'm writing myself a note because if I don't, I will forget. Good thing these meetings are recorded because we can refer back to them. So Doug, is there anything else you wanted to comment on while you're here? Otherwise, you are more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, or you can leave, and it's up to you.
So two things. One, first of all, thank you for, making sure that we went through this process. I think this, conversation was very constructive, and I think it's going to get us to the right, place. Is it August or Augie? What he mentioned about sunset reminded me of one other thing, that as if we're going to go that approach, let's make sure, and Steve knows about this, I've written a retention policy for things. So with regard to like e-discovery and things like that, let's make sure you at least address some form of retention or tie it into an established retention policy in another part of the organization. Because, as for my board colleagues, what I've said in my corporate life, prior to retirement was that an unscrupulous attorney could send you on an e-discovery mission if you didn't have a well-stated retention policy that would use up a lot of labor, a lot of time, a lot of effort, and prolong their approach to not really having to make any decisions until some of this rudimentary work was done. So, just if it comes to that point, I would ask you just to consider, including some form or reference to a retention policy. But other than that, thank you guys. I'm looking forward to getting your feedback and moving forward on this, and I appreciate it. And so, unless you need me for anything else, I'm going to go ahead and bow out, let you guys take care of the rest of your business.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Happy
All right, thank you,
holidays.
guys. And Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone.
All right.
And Laura, I did wear my.
I am very happy. Thank you.
I did wear it. Okay.
Yay.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, guys. Take care.
All
Thanks,
right.
Doug.
See ya. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that. All right, so we did this. All right. So if we go back up to the agenda, all right, we've taken care of the M08 under new business. The only reason I have under unfinished business CO1 and CO9 is just a status update on that, because I believe I had sent them to Steve. I can, and I apologize, y'all have to work with me on this, but my memory says that one or both of them had maybe gone through a first reading, but then never had a second reading. So we don't know the final status or update if they were approved or not. Steve, would you happen to have any thoughts or ideas on those two items?
Yeah, what what I have in my possession are the two charging documents from September of this year, from Jim, and dealing with we're going to do 09 first. That's really just a charging document to the board because it's their responsibility. To take a look at C09, which is the Executive Council, I think it's called, which, Laura, that was the meeting that you attended, and I was on it as well virtually.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
And I looked at the resolution. I don't think there's anything that needs to be changed, but it's really up to the board to address it. I would be prepared to take the charging document to the board at the January board meeting. I can't do it for December because that's tomorrow, and we've already had the call for documents, and I didn't really want to do that until we had a chance to meet. So I can put this on the agenda for the January board meeting.
Okay.
So C09 I think is just going to be a run-of-the-mill type. I'm not even sure there'll be
Okay.
any discussion, but I think it's
Okay.
just going to be a run-of-the-mill type thing. On C01, and Laura, you
That's this one.
sat in on some of that discussion the other night. I don't know the history, so let me backtrack on that. But the executive council did have a group that had put in, looks like a fair amount of work, dealing with the provisions in 4C, dealing with the application for membership on a committee. The stated view was they were trying to find a way to automate it as best possible. They came up with a flow chart, which if you looked at it quickly would probably give you a headache. But if you spend a little time looking at it, it actually made some sense following what their recommendations were. There was a fair amount of discussion about it as well. And my recollection is the way it was left was this group within the executive council had taken notes. They were going to refine their proposal and resubmit it. I think there was an email floating around after that that might have just gone to the board. I'm not positive about that. But the biggest part of the issue was just the terminology, because
Right.
the way C01 is written, and I think this is the correct way, is that the board is the only body that can vote on a committee member to someone to join the committee. The committee chair can make recommendations. Same thing for a reappointment of any length. But part of it was just cleaning up some of the terminology. So my recommendation is that while I have the charging document, my thought is maybe we should just hold it in abeyance until we get a finished product from this group. I'm assuming that they will probably forward it to the board, and the board would then send it back to us, or back to you, I should say, for consideration. But that would be my recommendation. It doesn't makes no sense to bring it up now to the board because it's still working.
Right. No, I would agree with that. So, okay, so we'll just keep that one. We'll keep them both on the agenda in the sense that CO9 will be, you'll send forward to the rest of the directors for the January meeting, and hopefully that'll be finished and complete after that meeting. And then the CO1, we are going to wait for more information from the work group that's been working on this, and redo this one at a later time then.
Yeah,
right?
and I'll make it a point to at least have a conversation with Doug and anybody else that I need to make sure that the finished product from the work group on C01 will get sent over to your committee for review.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. Keith?
Yeah, so are you saying that, so the reason this became an issue is because the conversation on it essentially died out back in July, looks like. So are you saying that since July, this issue has been, the discussion on this has been reinvigorated and there are people that are actively working it?
Is that to me?
Yes, Steve.
Okay. Keith, I as I said, I don't know the chronology. I don't know where the review started or how it started, because in part the executive council, or whatever they call themselves, they don't have a set meeting schedule. So they meet sort of at the call of the chair, who's the president of the board. I don't know how that began, but there was a desire clearly to automate it. They wanted to provide an applicant with a checklist. They drafted up, as I say, a flow chart. I think that was about the only documents they had. And let me add, by the way, because I did make some notes. What I do? They didn't. There was no real discussion, as I recall, at the last meeting of 4F or 4G, which is specifically identified in this charging document. The discussion that took place was really just around 4C. So there's
So
go ahead.
that charging document you have, is that from our board or is that from
That's one that Jim said. Jim did I'm just carrying over what Jim started.
Yeah,
These were started under Jim, so he made those charging documents, I think, for CO1 and CO9. I'm just furthering them that way. Yeah.
According to our government's document tracker, the history of this is that the last time it was reviewed was in 2020. So early this year, Jim advised the executive council that this thing needed to be reviewed. And so they put together this committee and they came up with some proposed changes, and then basically nothing happened. So then in July, Jim met with them and said, look, if you want, we'll take a look at your proposed changes and then help you get them, make any suggestions if necessary, and then help you get them to the board, because the board is ultimately responsible for approving this. And then Jim followed that up with the charging document you're talking about to formalize the need to do this. So now in September, of course, then, people changed, Jim changed, liaison changed. And so basically what the tracker says is we're waiting to reinvigorate this discussion with this charging document with the board. So I guess my question would be is, where are these red lines that the committee did? I don't recall us looking at them.
Yeah.
So maybe they never got to them. Maybe
that's my impression, because I'll be honest, I didn't realize that once you become chairperson that you're considered part of that executive committee until I got the email from Doug that he sent out to all the chairpersons, and basically my understanding is that one meeting was basically the result to have discussions about all of the annual reports that we all submitted, each of our committees submitted, to discuss and have any questions about that. And this was one of those topics that the one group had come up with. And I apologize for, I can't think of the name of that group right at the moment that really took charge of that. But I don't believe we ever had any further information from anybody outside of this for us to even look at it as a committee before it went to that executive committee meeting to have a discussion
right. So
with everybody.
I guess my point is, I think we need to submit the charging document to the board, because the board needs to go back to this committee and say, what do you got? Because I think the topic on it is stalled.
Well, Laura, if I may, Keith, I get what you're saying. I actually think that the notion of reinvigorating an examination of C01, in part because of this work group within the executive council, has taken place. Mm-hmm. You are correct that we have not gotten a red line copy, and the way, as I recall, it was left, and Laura, if you have a different recollection, let me know, is that this work group was going to take, with their notes and the comments received at the executive council meeting, revisit their draft document and resubmit it. And so my view is, and I'll defer to what the committee wants me to do, but my view is that the notion of, as you put it, reinvigorating is what's taking place. And I'm more than willing to touch base both with the work group and with Doug, just to make sure upon completion of their red line document that either that gets submitted to the board and the board sends it to us, or we get their red line document and we will then provide commentary when the board wants to take it up. We can do it, I think, either way.
Yeah, I don't think
Based
that,
with Doug on how he wants to deal with it.
yeah, I don't think there's an issue with, I'm not even sure there's an issue whether or not we look at it. Because again, we don't have to look at it because it's not our document. But, you know, like we've said in the past, we will if somebody wants us to look at something like this. I think that Jim's concern was that this has gone on for so long that without a charging document to track in front of the board, it's not going to be prioritized. And one of our responsibilities on this committee is to advise the board about these governing documents that are getting old. And this is one of them that's old.
Right, and I understand that. I would only differ with you on this point. And actually, both Doug and I made this point at the meeting of the Executive Council, which is that the board, that their terminology in their draft document was not appropriate, because only the board has the authority to vote on a committee member. And they were actually giving, my recollection is, the committee chairman veto power, and I think they actually extended it to the committee liaison, if I'm not mistaken. And we both made the point that that's not the way this system is meant to work. So their goal, as I say, was to try to automate the process as best as possible and sort of decrease the paperwork load. I think they're still interested in doing that. But clearly there were snags in what they had drafted. So I would suggest to you that it is appropriate for this committee to review their product when they finish it. I'm just saying it's not finished.
Right.
And I'm willing to try, at least informally, I can let you know what happens in January, to make sure that the committee has the opportunity to review the product, either contemporaneous with the work of the work group or afterwards, and have the board send it back to us. I don't think it makes much difference. You do it either way. But I certainly don't want this committee not to have an opportunity to review it.
Mm-hmm.
So our status of today on this, on C01 specifically, is to, I'm trying to update my sheet here, is to what? Is to wait.
My suggestion would be to say something, awaiting document from work group under Executive Council. I mean, or words to that effect.
So we want to keep it and put it back on our January agenda. Is that what we're saying then too? Right? Okay.
I would think so, even if there's not a particular
Update yet, but
you, yes, I would think you'd want to at least list it under old business.
okay.
Unless, again, unless the committee is comfortable taking it up under the governance document review, you may want to list it separately under that one. I don't know.
Right.
But, yes,
well,
you should stay current on the developments. Yes.
Well, I think that was what the point of the charging document was to go to the board and say, what do you want to do about this?
Right.
You want us to look at it? You want them to send us red lines? I think that was the initial intent, was just to formalize the issue and to get some guidance from the board about what they want to do about it.
And have, like you keep saying, have a way to track it, because just verbalizing it or talking about it doesn't mean anybody's going to remember that we need to put an end date on it at some point, you know, saying, yes, it was reviewed and approved and whatever, so that we can have an updated review date on there, you know, because some of what our discussions in other areas have all been about communication And this would be our way of trying to communicate and say, hey, this is still a topic. We need to know where it stands so it doesn't get forgotten. And, because other things will come up. And just like what's happened before, a lot of things got kind of distracted and put aside, I think, with the past liaison, in the sense that it wasn't the priority at that moment. But that doesn't mean we needed to stop checking on it. So these charging documents, in my mind, that's a one way for us to help formalize the communication between all of us.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with any of that. I would just simply make the observation, and if you, again, if you want me to bring it up to the board in January, I will. But I think if that came up in January, the board's response would be, because and Doug's aware of this as much as anyone, is that there's a work group working on this. We're waiting to get their finished product, and that's where we are. So I don't think, unlike what might have been happening in the spring and summer of this year, I don't think it's sort of lying fallow right now, if you will.
Okay.
And so, and that's sort of where we are.
Yeah, I all of that makes sense to me. I guess I would just say, and I think Laura already said this, that, maybe bringing it up to the board would be, can we draw a line in the sand? Can we give them 30 days, 60 days, 90? Can we give them some kind of deadline for this? And it doesn't have to be perfect.
Right.
It can just be their red lines, their draft of this is what they think needs to be changed, so that it can come to us and we can help them finish it and turn it into a finished product. But
so we're not waiting to finish it in 6 months,
right.
Because every time we have to wait for another monthly meeting of somebody, whether it's our committee or the directors for the next part of the discussion, we're moving along in the year again. So
how often does the executive council meet?
I don't know.
Well, I don't think they have I could be wrong about this. I don't think they have a set schedule. I believe it's basically the council is made up of the chair is the president. I believe the secretary is on it as well, and then all of the various committee chairs, of which Laura is one.
Right.
Now, frankly, I don't know why Laura was not included in the work group, or why Jim wasn't included in the work group. I don't have any knowledge of that.
Right.
It was all before I got on the board, but.
And I don't recall Jim saying anything about
right.
being on a work group with for this particular topic anyway. But yeah.
Right. But and I think in fairness to Jim, he, as Keith points out, he wanted to sort of kick everybody in the rear to get this thing moving. I think he's done that. And I guess what I would say to you is, I'll be happy to report back to the committee at the committee's January meeting with a status based upon my conversations, or at least my emails, with both the work group and with Doug as to how he wants to proceed. And if at that point the committee feels it's important to move forward on a charging document, we can do that. In the alternative, we might be hitting the red line date anyway. So
right.
I understand it's late, but I think there's actually work being done.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let me go back. All right. So we've completed discussion on C09 and C01, right? We did turn in our annual report before the due date. And basically that's during that executive council meeting. When it came to my turn, that was just basically what I kind of reported on to the group, was what we had done over the last year in that report. Under old unfinished business, we did one of our tasks that we had said in October is that we wanted to set our meeting dates for January, for the 2023 year, which has been completed up through July. I should change that because down further, this was all took place. The conversation started before my son got sick, but then thankfully Linda Martin was very gracious and helped go through the book for me and pick out the dates of when we could meet. What we did, and part of our discussion at the October meeting that Bob brought up, is that maybe we should try to have our committee meetings at least 1 week prior to the directors meeting, so that if we wanted something in a more timely manner to maybe have an opportunity to be presented, we could do so. Because like you said, we're having a meeting today and the next director's meeting's tomorrow. Can't really do anything that way, right? So Linda went through the calendar for me and sent me back all of the dates. So basically, they're all kind of like the second Friday of every month, with the only exception being the month of April. And this one we can wait and double check closer in the year, but in April, our typical meeting date would have been the 7th, based on when the directors meetings were going to be. But that is Good Friday, and that's the holiday weekend for Easter. So I believe, my guess is, I believe the office would be closed, for that Friday. So she at least put us in for well, I guess it's the Blue Room now, the Blue Room for that Thursday, the 6th. But like I said, we can wait until like February or even March to decide if, one, we need to meet right before the holiday, or if Thursdays are not good for the rest of you, moving it to a different week or something for that month. Okay. So, but she only did it through July. I'm under the assumption, simply because then after the elections, the potential directors meetings could change their dates of when they might meet, with a new board in place. At that time, they may not stick with the Saturday meetings or whatever. So we only have dates up through July. Okay. Okay, so under new business, we did M08. M05 is the animal control one. And this is what we have here. Keith, you may have to help refresh my memory on some of this. Is our status now to look at all of this and see if we have any questions or concerns or changes into any of the wording before we turn it into something that goes forward for approval?
So I'm referring to the notes in the tracking document, and there was a couple of meetings that I missed. This may have been one of them. But according to this, our committee redlined this document, and then Jim provide a draft to the board to include the authority for police charges over related. So according to this, we drafted this up. Jim drafted up our comments. The committee approved it, and it was to be submitted to the board for a first reading.
Okay.
Do we know if that's happened?
That probably, my guess is no. I don't recall it being on any of the directors meeting agendas as a first reading. Do you, Steve? For M05?
It has not come up since I've been on the board. My recollection was And I'm working with the copy that I got when I was on the committee. So there was at least one typo that had to be corrected that Jim was, I think, going to take care of. My notes are in section 2C. There needed to be I guess, a space between the word section and the number 10-6. And then I had something else crossed out. 19 of the criminal, I don't know. Anyway, my only point is it has not come up before the best of my recollection, hasn't come up before the board. So I am assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, I would need to take this to the board with a charging document from the committee, which I don't have. So I would need the committee to draft a charging document with the final version of M05. And if I receive that in time, I'll put it on the January agenda.
Okay.
Is that I assume that to be the correct procedure?
I think so. Under correct.
Are we sure we don't already have a charging document for this? Because again, according to the historical notes, back in May of this year, the board discussed this M05.
Let me see.
Because there were concerns about it. And potential amendment topics were identified and responsibility assigned for follow-up, no time frame established. And so then it came to us in some fashion for us to.
I just opened up my file under Jim's flash drive, is how I have it labeled. I do not have a charging document for M05. I just have this draft.
So I don't, I wish we had some of the legacy folks here, but I don't recall us doing charging documents for everything. It seemed to me like charging documents were when the board was tasking us to do something.
Right.
But when a lot of times the board does not send us a charging document for whatever reason, and we're the ones who have to start the discussion.
Right.
And in the past, the way we've done that is we've talked about it. Jim drafted up our thoughts and concerns, and then the board liaison took that to the board and said, this is a board resolution that's supposed to be reviewed. The committee's got some concerns about it. Do we want them to do something about it? And then the board would come back with a charging document and say, yes, do something about it. So the notes that I have here make it sound like the board had some questions or issues. We drafted something up to go back to them to address their issues, because it's specifically in here as a first reading.
Right.
Meaning we were charged with it, we addressed it, and we're going back with it. So I guess I don't really understand specifically when charging documents are required to address an issue or not, but the current status that's in the tracker is that it's back to the board for first reading, or needs to be taken to the board for first reading.
Well, let me.
And I guess we can go through this. There's a bunch of them we're going to have to go through here when we get to charging documents. So,
I would simply say this: charging documents are written so they can go either way. They can go from the committee to the board, or from the board down to the committee. They are fungible in that regard. My recollection, again, from when I was on the committee, was this resolution was simply to bring the policy of Ocean Pines in line, or make it clear that we are ceding jurisdiction to Worcester County. I will confess, I do not know procedurally the best way to proceed. I will check. as to how to get, if you folks send me a finished or polished, whatever term you want to use, copy of the resolution, I'll find out how we want to get it to the board. We can either take it up as a charging document, I can bring it up as a discussion item, and I can, recount the history that, Keith has just provided to us, and go from there. I had just assumed, in order to get it up before the board, we would almost have to do it as a charging document from the committee. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I don't know what the whatever, I think you said April or May of last year. I don't know what triggered the board's action to send it down to us.
Well, I remember part of that. Part of it had to do with, I think it was the old police chief who had concerns about the perceived responsibilities of the Ocean Pines police with regard to these strays that they pick up.
Right.
Because in the past, it's always been kind of informal, where, they'd pick them up, they'd take them to the police station, and, depending on how friendly they were, they'd let them run around until somebody,
Right.
until somebody claimed them. But his concern is that even though they may do that very informally as a courtesy, it's not a requirement.
It's not really their job, right?
It's not their job. And sometimes they can't pick up, like a large dog that's maybe not that friendly and just let it sit by the dispatcher's desk. It needs to be in some sort of kennel. So now we're talking about financial issues. And this was, I think, as they were designing the new police station. So they were trying to decide, do we need to incorporate some stuff? And then somebody said, well, the county, it's really the county's responsibility. So I think that's how this whole discussion got started. I think it was the old police chief who brought it up.
Okay. Okay, let's do this. If you're okay with this, I will touch base to figure out procedurally how to do this. But as I say, I would need a clean copy of the resolution.
Okay.
I don't need a second, but let me do a little checking as to how to proceed, and I'll either come back to you, Laura, with a request for a charging document, or we'll figure out whatever the appropriate procedure is. As long as I have a clean one to proceed with, I'll just, I'll give the short history from Keith that Keith provided, and we'll go from there.
Okay. All right. I can make sure we have a clean copy of the draft that we have in front of us. So I'll do that, and then if need be, I'll be prepared to put together a charging document as well from us to the directors. But like, I think we're all kind of, Jim just kind of knew how to do these things. He'd been doing it for so long. I don't think it was ever explained to me, like, when the proper use is either of how to use a charging document, who makes it up, all that kind of stuff. So for us in this committee, since we're all basically reforming and everything, this is kind of a new, just getting a handle on how we move forward as a team on doing these tasks, moving forward, without, and I'm sure I could email Jim and say, hey, I need some help, but, without having to bother him, we'll figure out how we handle these kind of things as well.
Fair enough.
Laura, in the stuff that Jim gave you, are any of those files a charging document tracker? Because I would have to imagine, knowing Jim, that every time there was a charging document, a formal charging document, he'd log it. Right? I wonder if he kept a log of the documents that, for historical purposes,
Well,
if you can't find it in there, then maybe that's something you could email him about.
Yeah, I don't see a log, but on the flash drive, he gave me the charging documents for everything in the past, like the B05, everything that we've done um, in most recent times, I think. But I'll have to go back. He did give me one big old book, but I don't even think that's relevant, or it's not, it doesn't pertain to current items like that. So I'll have to ask him if he's got some other type of log that he kept that wasn't on that flash drive.
Sounds like
Just-
maybe he
just
just
see,
kept
yeah.
copies of the actual charging documents.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So, because I have all of those in my own file too. Then I made a separate folder for just charging documents. So once we create one and it's called a charging document, I've been putting them all there so that I can go back and find them. It gets a little crazy trying to figure out how I'm supposed to organize this stuff. Do I do it by meeting? Do I do it by, So, but I can go back and look at some of those and see if there's an end date, like if there's any kind of notation at the bottom of his charging documents, with a resolution follow-up, it was completed on whatever. Because I think that's been part of our communication issues too. We don't always know when something has actually been. And then sometimes we've had those first readings with the directors, but then other items got preference on the future agenda meetings for the directors. And then we kind of forgot, oh, wait, it never had a second reading, so I think we do need to work on having a better way to remember which ones have had the first readings and which ones haven't been fully completed yet, or maybe we submitted them and they never made it to the agenda. So a little bit of a learning curve for all of us, I think. Okay, so let me find. All right, so now I'm up to under new business. Let me pull up. I gotta find it. I have so many. Is that this one? Is that this one? Is this what you want us? Our board liaison, Steve, had requested that we talk about. Well, we have two things: records retention policy, and the board and officer ethics and conduct. So, what would you like to? How would you like to proceed on this discussion, Steve? Which
Okay.
document would you like me to have up?
Here, Laura, just I drafted 2 charging documents to the committee. The one is on records retention, and the other one is on the, lack of a better term, ethics question. The records retention, I think, is sort of the more time-sensitive one. You'll remember that Doug already mentioned it when we were discussing M08. And it's something that he has made it a point of interest, at least for him. I think that's fair to say. And he attached which you now have, a policy statement dealing with retaining records for both the board and for the advisory committees.
Okay, so I have both. I have both charging documents. The one I have up currently is the one on the ethics, and then this one, I believe, then is for the record retention.
Right.
Are we talking about them simultaneously, or one versus the other?
2 separate.
Okay, so which one do you want to start with?
Let's do record retention. I think that'll be the easier one, and it's the one that is a little bit more time sensitive.
Okay.
Basically, what has happened is there's been a discussion. I guess it might have been initially budget driven. I'm not positive about that. about how do we retain our minutes as well as our video recordings of both the board and committee meetings. I believe not all the committees, by the way, do video recordings. That may change as well. But the bottom line is, as a, I guess you'd call it a digital matter, there's limited capacity to hold on to all of the video recordings. So the records retention policy worksheet basically lays out how this would work. The board meeting videos would be retained for 5 years, after which time they'd be removed and deleted. And then the minutes would be retained for 5 years. It's the responsibility of the general manager or his designee to see to this. There's a distinction made between the board and the advisory committees. I mean, that's sort of basic. The advisory committees, there was some discussion back and forth about how long to retain the video of the committee meetings. And I think they ultimately have recommended it be, after some discussion back and forth, the suggestion was to make it at 2 months. So for argument's sake, this committee meeting, if this was the policy of the association, this meeting after February would be deleted. And the minutes, however, I believe would be retained for 5 years. I'm sorry, 3 years. I apologize, 3 years.
Can I just question here real quick? So for the advisory committees, now I understand there's an exception with, I think, what is it, the election committee? But most of the advisory committees have no direct authority to make any changes to anything. You know, all we can do is advise the board in our capacity, and the board makes the ultimate decisions. I mean, even if we, for example, in our committee, completely rewrite a document, if the board doesn't approve it, it doesn't happen.
Right.
So from a legal standpoint, what difference does it make if we archive advisory committee meetings?
I'm sorry, say that again.
From a legal standpoint, why would there be a requirement to archive advisory committee meetings 3 years, 5 years, when, except for, again, I think like the election committee maybe, but most of the advisory committees have no direct authority to make any changes in Ocean Pines.
Well, I think that's true. I think what you've got right now is, and I hesitate to speak for Doug, but I think I know what he would say, is that there's no policy at all.
Oh, yeah.
And to the extent, and I think he uses as an example, if we are served with a discovery request from counsel for some party who is suing the association for whatever reason, we need a policy in place that makes at least the not sure, it's not chain of custody, that's not what I'm trying to get at, but some sort of unfolding as to how the policy developed.
Yep.
And so that's why the minutes would be kept for a period of time. That's why the board minutes would be kept for a period of time. And the same thing for the video. So right now there's no policy at all. So there's as it applies to the video, there's some consideration as to capacity and cost. Just a physical, what do we have that allows us to store stuff? And we have limited capacity if we were to include all of the advisory committee meetings as well as the board meetings. So as opposed to spending the money to add more capacity, we're looking to cull the herd, if you will, as time goes by. The other is sort of the precautionary legal, whatever term you want to use, basis for keeping minutes and for the board video available over a longer period of time. And so I think that's really what we're looking at. Is there's no policy in place now. We need to set a policy and confer upon the general manager or designee a means to keep this up to speed and up to date. So that's really what we're looking at right now.
So what if, so I see here, I think it was on this one and the other one, it says, one of the questions is, do we need a new resolution for this? So back to M08, association manuals, what if we changed M08 to association manuals and records? And then redlined in some language into this that laid out those guidelines, and then as opposed to creating a whole new resolution. Just a thought.
Yeah, if the question is to me, Keith, I think that's fine. I think the idea is I think what the board is interested in is having the committee look at this and have something ready to go forward as quickly as possible, for lack of a better term. It may be you could fold the issue of M08 in with this. It may be we have to develop two separate resolutions. I think at this point, there's a desire to move as best we can to set up a policy on record retention. So how the committee wants to tackle that, that's up to the committee. And you folks may want to sort of chew on that for a few weeks and take a crack at putting something together for your January board meeting, so you have something ready to discuss, however you want to do it. But I can tell you the interest on the board side is to move on this.
All right, so what I'm hearing and making notes on too is that we should be adding this, should be on our January agenda. And prior to that, I can resend out, we can just start, I can resend out an email with just that topic area on it, all of the documents that we have to look at it. Because sometimes I feel like some of our emails have so many documents on there, trying to go back and find them later is hard. So if I just make one email that only pertains to the record retention stuff, we all have time to look at it before our January meeting, because if it's time sensitive and we need to present it at to get it back to Steve so that he can add it to the director's January meeting, which should be the week after our meeting, we need to be able to finish that conversation in January, right? Unless we go back to him and say, it's not quite done yet, we need to move it to the February director's meeting. But I feel like we can't wait and just start the discussion at the January meeting. We probably won't finish it. But if we can look at all the information ahead of time, again, take the time to make your notes or whatever, so that when we do meet in January on the 13th, we can hopefully come to a conclusion on how to proceed and what we need to forward to Steve then to take to the directors. Is that a correct understanding? Okay.
I'm good with that.
Steve, what I have a question. It's okay. There's this policy document draft, and then there's some notes. Do the notes reflect desired tweaks to the policy document, or does the policy document kind of reflect the notes and sort of what the discussion ended up at?
Yeah, let me
So this one, Augie, that's marked retention policy, is that the one you're talking, this marked draft? Is that the one you're questioning?
And the next page are some notes that have some different time
Oh,
frames
right, yeah.
in red, and
Right.
Not really clear what the notes are. Or do
Right.
they pre-
I think the notes are a reflection of some of the initial emails that bounced around. My recollection is that Doug took it upon himself to develop a draft document to begin to think about, and this reflects at least some of the discussion back and forth. Hold on, let me just pay attention to the. Yeah, I think I think what you're seeing is just sort of the discussion items. The draft document, which is the draft policy statement, reflects where we are currently.
Got it.
I would add one other thing, and I don't know that the committee needs to address this, but I will tell you that there was some discussion about the roles of some of the committees, most particularly the ARC committee, or that's sort of redundant, but ARC, because they do get involved in some enforcement measures that address individual lot owners. And there's an open question as to whether or not that needs to be done outside of a video recording, for argument's sake, where there's some discussion about an individual and their ability to, let's say, pay for some of the repairs that need to be done or other considerations. And I don't think, as best as I can recall, that they ever came to grips with that. But that was what I don't see it here, but that was one other discussion item that came up. I don't see anything else about that. And then I guess at the bottom, there's some discussion about financial reports and organizational audits need to be saved as well. And whether or not there's a separate consideration under federal statute for that. Yeah, what you have is sort of the traveling of the policy statement, and that's what the second page refers to, Augie, is some of the discussion that took place.
Okay.
If I may, and thanks, Augie, for bringing that up, because now after looking at some of this stuff, I'm just going to put it out there. There is no way we as a committee are going to have something suitable to present to the board in January.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way. There's a lot to think about here. There's a lot to noodle on, and
I would also like to get Bob's opinion too. Being our longest member, I think he would have some good thoughts too on some of this.
Yeah, unless we're going to devote the entire next meeting to this issue,
right?
I think, even if we all get a little package like what you're talking about, Laura, and we think about it and kind of write up our own comments and notes about it, the best we're going to be able to come away with in a January meeting is something really rough and ugly that is not going to be ready for the board yet. This is a bigger issue, I guess, than what I originally thought it was.
Mm-hmm. Pam?
I'm wondering if there are standards, a generalized standard for HOAs that already have some of this written up, and is this something that needs to go through the lawyers?
That I don't know. We don't have a whole lot of communication with us as a committee. Any feedback from the legal team?
Well, I would say that
most things that I've gone to, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It's a good point. I think this is really a board project that they're asking us to help draft up. So essentially what would happen is, to the extent that we could, and we've been down this road before on other issues where we were concerned there was a legal issue,
Mhm.
But it's really up to the board if they want to forward this for legal review. Because I think that was one of the things that we presented. It was in our annual report, wasn't it, Laura? Where
It was, yes.
we don't really have the authority to have anything legally reviewed as an advisory committee. All we can do is suggest to the board that they do it.
That they take it to the legal team, right? Mhm.
Yeah.
So we
Pam?
make recommendations, to send it to legal. I'm just, having followed a lot of things that have gone on, what I see is we haven't, there's unintended consequences for some things that not we, but the board recommends. And so our committee probably has some kind of responsibility to say, this is a bigger issue, as you pointed out. I don't remember your name. This is a bigger issue than just the bylaws committee putting some information together. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And we've had to do that in the past. As we talk through it, we come to the realization that this is kind of beyond our scope. And even though we can draft, administratively some
Right.
language, we can't say that this language is legally correct, that it doesn't conflict with Maryland law. And so the best we can do is kind of redline something, send it to the board and say, you really need to have this legally reviewed. And
Correct.
here's why we think that that's an issue.
Then the second part to that for me has always been, once we've done that, we forward it and said, we recommend legal look at this to make sure it is correct. We never get a final answer back as a committee, because if the directors go to legal and say, can you review this? Legal goes back to the directors. Then we need our liaison or someone to be able to come back and say, yes, legal said this is the right verbiage to use or whatever, so that I would think it would also help us know that if we are redlining or drafting things, we are trying to do them to the best of our ability in a legal manner right from the get-go versus always redrafting something and maybe it's not using the correct language, so I feel like sometimes we send the information out, but then we don't get any resolution on our end to know that it did go through legal. But yes, to Pam's point, we can draft something, but then and we can recommend to the directors, we need you now to take it forward, because taking it to legal costs money and we don't have the authority to say, add this, to the bill. So Pam?
The other question I have is, are there HOA standards, sort of like standards of practice in medicine? Are there standards that other HOAs use, like the Internal Revenue Service, 7 years, keep your records? Are there some kind of standard like that?
I personally don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look up Maryland HOA laws on that. I'm more familiar with, like you said, the standard IRS recommendations for retention for nonprofits and things like that. Like minutes are actually, for us in the PTA world, we're supposed to keep them forever. They never get thrown out or anything like that. So I don't know off the top of my head if Keith or Augie or Steve happens to know, but otherwise we'll have to. That's something that we could do, is try and go back and see if under the Maryland HOA laws, if there's something there.
Sounds like something that the legal review would suss out.
Right.
Is there something in the Maryland HOA
Right.
law that deals with record retention?
And that's right. And that's something that legal should be telling us. Hey, they should be telling the directors, you know what, according to Maryland HOA laws, you should be retaining minutes forever versus only 5 years or whatever. So maybe that is something that it is part of our recommendation, that we say, can legal tell us what's appropriate for that topic? So.
I mean, there are certainly a lot of record retention policies out there that could
Mhm.
be, frameworks, but I don't.
Right. Okay. All right. All right. So, Steve, do you want to have me bring up the other one though on ethics? Is that a time one,
Right.
time sensitive one also, or is that one? Do we have a little bit more time on that?
It's not as time sensitive, but it is something that is appropriate for the committee to take under consideration. I can give you a quick thumbnail on this, if I may.
Okay.
I attached, when I sent this to Laura, I attached, I believe, several documents that are worthy of consideration. Let me backtrack. Apparently, and again, this is before my time on the board, there was a prior resolution, B08, I believe. I'm sure I got that right. Yeah, B08, which addressed ethics and practices for board members. Apparently, that resolution was repealed by the board in large part because some of the enforcement language, which you'll see in there, was deemed to be either inappropriate or unworkable or in some way flawed. Again, this is before my time on the board. I did not participate in that discussion. And it may be that Bob and Jim are more familiar with this than I am. I certainly would defer to them on that point. It also has come up that there is an ongoing requirement on members of the board who have left the board to maintain confidentiality. They have a continuing duty of confidentiality that needs to be sent to the board member who is leaving on a regular and sort of uniform basis. The council this year drafted a letter, which I don't think I included. I don't think.
Is that this? No, wait, that was from Jeremy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's B08. That's the record retention. We'll get to that one. So the only letter I have is that one that you sent. I don't know if I have
the memorandum, right?
that one. Okay.
Yeah. And the council sent to all of the former board members who left within the last 3 years a letter regarding their continuing duty of confidentiality. And that's sort of where we are. But the notion would be for the committee to consider several things. One is, should we find a way to use Keith's term, reinvigorate, or at least recreate a resolution relating to behavior and ethics? And then tied to that is the notion that members of the board who are departing have a continuing duty of confidentiality, and council needs to inform that departing member on as they depart as to what their duty is. So there's sort of two things that are sort of tied together here, and I think it's fair to say we want to, particularly as it relates to the continuing duty of confidentiality, to make this sort of a regular occurrence every year. As a board member leaves, council is charged with informing the former board member of what their duties are. There's, at some point it becomes boilerplate language, but basically to get it done on a regular basis, as opposed to what they went through this year, which was to send something out to everyone who left over the last 3 years because no one had done it before.
Right.
So I don't, subject to change, I don't see this as something that is a hot plate issue, but I do see it as something that the board would like to see the committee tackle and get back to us over a period of time.
Okay. So is this also, when you say when a director leaves, it's for any reason, correct? By choice, by not being reelected, by removal, any of those, would they all still receive this letter saying you are still, you're no longer a director at this point, you please remain, keep following the confidentiality policies?
Well, I would, I don't think it makes any difference as to why the board member leaves.
So we can just call it.
But there is a requirement that the board member be informed of the
Right.
continuing duty of confidentiality. I don't know that all of the scenarios were considered, but I would say that the feeling was, or is, that this is something that should go to any departing board member, if not as they depart, at least within the year in which their departure took place. I think that answers the question.
Okay, Pam?
I'm wondering, I read this resolution. I don't see any teeth in it. Do they somehow sign on this? That's usually what happens, or at least in my experience, that you have to sign that you understand that this is confidential and ethical behavior. How do you, I mean, what if they say, I never received a form?
Well, are we talking about a new resolution relating to ethics, or the letter itself as to what their continuing duty is? Or both?
I'm talking, yes, both.
Oh, well, as to the resolution, every board member gets a book of all the resolutions, bylaws, etc. And so they are suitably informed at that time. If they don't read it, it's their problem, but they get the resolution. As to the letter, my assumption would be, and I don't know the answer to this, is that it's probably mailed to them, certified return request, something to make sure that they got it. I'm not positive. I think, frankly, to the extent it's highlighted within the resolution, as to what their duties are, even if they could claim they didn't receive the letter, they would be on notice that they should have received the letter. If they didn't, I mean, that would be a argument to be fought out in the courts of law, if it came to that. But I would assume counsel would keep sufficient records to show that the letter was sent.
Okay.
Whether or not you want to,
I'm just
requirement that
I'm just thinking of confidentiality in healthcare. There's always got to be a signature on it. So all that does is dot the I, cross the T.
as to the letter to departing board members, I think that's correct. I don't know a lot about healthcare, so I mean I'm a user, not a provider, but my feeling is that's always sort of a special case, and the desire to ensure privacy is important.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether it's healthcare or not. I can go back and forth between business and healthcare. The point is, it's about accountability. If you don't sign something, then you can say, I didn't understand it. There's a whole plethora of things you can come up with. But if there's a signature on it, that means that you read it and you signed it, or at least you signed it.
Right. Keith?
Yeah, so backing up several months now, I drafted what would eventually become the new questionnaire for board candidates.
Mhm.
What was eventually approved by the board was modified from my original input, but I put in that original application for consideration to be a board member exactly what you're talking about, Pam. At the very bottom, it said, I understand and agree that if I am elected to the board of directors, I will blah, 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 and sign here, right? So the information I've provided you is accurate. I understand my responsibilities. I will make myself familiar with all governing documents. This could be added. I understand that there are, in accordance with, B08, there are ethics and conduct requirements for directors, yada, yada, yada. So in other words, I'm applying to be a candidate for a board. I've been educated about what that means and what I'm signing up for, and I sign here. What I don't know is if in the final version that was approved
If that was
by
cut.
the board, if that was in there or not, or if it was cut. But I think that's the first place to start, because if I'm a candidate for the board, I want to know what I'm signing up for. I don't want to find out later after I'm elected that there's some sort of restrictions that have been placed on me or something else that had I known that, I
You
might
might-
not have
right.
applied to be a candidate. So I don't even know I can't remember where that thing is even located, that questionnaire. I'd have to go back and I want to say it was an amendment to,
Bylaws.
was it the elections? Was it C08?
No, I think it was when we were drafting the changes to the bylaws.
Yeah, but
I can
actual
probably go
candidate-
find it. Yeah.
the candidate letter itself, I don't think was in the bylaws. I think it was in a resolution.
I think it was an attachment to the bylaws.
Hmm.
I remember you and I talked about it
Mm-hmm.
quite some time, Keith, because if you remember when I was on the committee, you and I sort of formed
Work together on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
crack the net on all this,
Right.
and that's what we did. Look, let me put it to you this way: if the committee's view is that a signature is required upon receiving the book of resolutions, or on specifically understanding what the duties are as specified in B08, or on receiving a letter upon departure, that is, however you want to do it, that's fine. If that's what you're going to recommend, I think that's what you should do.
Yeah, I think we just have to go back and do a little homework and
Right.
kind of see what we worked on in the past. And but I understand the need for this, and I agree that it should be added to our agenda for future work.
All right. Is there any further discussion, Steve, that you want to mention about either of those two topics, knowing that moving forward, we will have them on our January agenda, and then more than likely may or may not also end up on our February agenda as well, because I don't think we're going to get all of that discussion done next month for any of this. So we'll concentrate on the more time sensitive one first, and then as we move forward, we'll keep working on the other stuff as well.
And my best to keep you guys busy, you know.
Hey, Laura,
Yeah.
I would just suggest, I'm just throwing this out there. Back during the big bylaws update, there was so much work associated with that we had extra meetings.
Right. Do you want?
So I'm just throwing it out there because I can't speak for everybody, that on this other issue of records retention, where the board is concerned about, getting some movement on that quickly,
Right.
I would be amenable if we could all find a slot to throw in an extra meeting where we could get together and kind of talk through that and move on that more. I'm just saying, for me personally, I would be amenable to that.
The only issue I have is that we do have the holidays coming up here. That kind of throws a big wrench in there, and the holidays on a weekend. So, like I could do a virtual meeting. Let's see, what is today? Today's the 16th. I could probably squeeze in a virtual meeting next week, the 23rd or the 30th. But again, those are both holiday weekends. So I don't know if you all want to meet right before the holiday weekends. It is still a work day. Or do we want to, if we wanted to add another meeting and have 2 weeks back to back, we could see if January 6th works for everybody and then also have our 13th. That would still have us having an extra meeting prior to, if we're trying to wrap up the time sensitive one prior to the next director's January meeting, which I believe then would be what, the 21st, Steve, do you know?
I probably have it in my phone. Hold on.
Because if Linda gave us the 13th as our date, I'm assuming that meant because the directors were going to meet on the 21st.
Yeah, that looks right. It's the third Saturday. That looks right.
Okay. So
on the agenda, it says January 23rd. Your agenda.
Yeah, that it's the 13th actually. That's a typo.
Okay.
So
yeah. This is something that the committee needs to address, how they want to approach it. And I'm sort of, if you have a meeting, I'll be there because I'm the liaison. Look, if Keith may be right. It may be worthwhile to have a meeting just address the records retention issue, but I don't think you need to feel come hell or high water, you get something to the board for the January board meeting. Okay. You've got some fudge time to play with here. So I mean,
so potentially could
look at it in terms of we'd like to have something for the board in February. I don't think the board would be upset about that. I mean, I can deal with that on behalf of the committee to the board members.
So instead of trying to throw in an extra meeting in the next 2 weeks with the holidays and everything, we meet on the 13th, and then we could basically decide if we wanted to meet 2 weeks later on the 27th, which would still put us, and then, because then the February one is on the 10th, 2 weeks after that.
Right.
So the February directors meeting shouldn't be until like the 18th. That would give us potentially 3 meetings to get everything with enough time for Steve as liaison prior to his meeting in February to get our documents like on the agenda, on their agenda, right. With it when they call for his for their items for that agenda, versus trying to squeeze it all in now. Would that be more?
I'm cool with that. I'm cool with that. That's probably a good idea. And I would also just throw out there again, just speaking for myself, that if whatever this extra meeting doesn't have to be a Friday for me.
Okay. All right. Well, how about if I send out? Say that again.
I'm pretty loose. I'm pretty loose. I don't do anything.
I can make another day work, especially if it's a virtual meeting.
Right. Yep. Okay. Okay. I'll send out an email to all of us, including Bob, because I know on the 13th, Bob is traveling, I think, home from his trip. So he may not make it for the 13th, but he would definitely be able to do our other ones after that. So, but I'll send out and include him in the email and everything. And so we can finalize the extra meeting date by email. Is that okay? Okay.
Laura, can I add? I'm not sure you have it on your agenda or not, but I want to. The ARC issue that Keith had raised.
Oh, yeah. About the signs and everything.
Right, and I
I don't think I put
thought,
that.
if I didn't, I apologize. I thought I had sent, I had sent something to Colette.
Mhm.
We're basically transmitting the issue of the statute that Keith had raised.
Mhm.
I didn't hear back from her, and I sent it to her again, and she sent me back a response saying, well, it fell through the cracks. You know, I'm trying to get a handle on what it is you're raising here. I think I thought I sent that to you. I'm not sure if I did or I didn't.
I don't recall seeing that, but I had reached out to, is it the elections committee that does the signs,
This is
right? I think because, or somebody, and maybe it was the architectural one,
Well, CPI
So-
enforces the bylaw about it.
right.
So CPI is the one who would go around and take signs out of people's yards.
right.
And I believe, and I'll have to go back to my email because this all happened. November was rough, but they didn't think it applied the way we were interpreting it.
Yeah.
So, and I at that time I probably let it drop in the sense that, you know, I had other things, you know, that I was trying to deal with, but I do think we probably should bring it back up again as well, to have a more concise answer to that, to go back, because I don't think they were interpreting it correctly the same way that we were. So
Yeah, and I think part of the confusion is, as I recall, and I'm trying to do this from memory, there's two different places where this is discussed. I want to say, I think maybe there is a place in the bylaws that talks about it, and I think maybe there's a place in the ARC guidelines that talk about it. And I think in one place it's okay, but in the other place it's not. And in the place that it's not okay, it directly conflicts with Maryland HOA law.
Right.
I remember this. I'll give you the history on it. Jim's the one who brought this up because Jim had somebody from CPI come in his yard and take a sign.
Oh.
Oh yeah, that's the reason this came up.
Okay.
And the issue was that we've got a rule in writing somewhere that says you cannot have more than one sign per person. So let's say John Smith is running for office. So the rule we have says you can't have more than one John Smith sign in your yard. And what Jim had, he had one sign that said John Smith, and then he had another sign that said John Smith and Betty Boop.
Gotcha.
Right? So one was a sign that was just for that individual, and the other one, it was probably for governor maybe. So governor and, lieutenant governor kind of situation. Right. And so CPI came in and said, you can't have that. You got two signs with the same name on it. And they literally took one. And so Jim was pretty passionate about this. And that's the whole reason the thing came up. and I want to say, as memory serves me, it's talked about in two different locations, and one location's okay and the other location's not.
Okay, well, if I would assume that if CPI took the actions, then the issue would be in the ARC guidelines. That'd be my
Yeah, that could be.
And then because you brought it up, Keith, because somebody, and I'm guessing maybe it's that department, but somebody on social media was representing ARC or whatever, saying, hey, here's some reminders, and that was included in it. Right. And that's why you were saying we need to stop promoting that, because it's not legal in that sense, that we were breaking, we're going against, like you said, the Maryland HOA laws on political signs and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. I was just saying, until we resolve this issue, let's stop advertising it.
Right. Yes.
Here's what I would suggest, if it's okay. I will send back to you, Laura, my latest email communications with Colette.
Okay.
I had sent it to her because she's the ARC committee liaison. Okay. I think I can't remember that you and I talked, or they were about you reaching out to the chair of the ARC as well.
Which I think I did.
Yeah, but I do recall that Colette's last email back to me was, can you explain to me what this is all about in plain English? And I did not do that because I was really just sort of the bypass from, I guess, Keith's original memo
Right.
to her, for her to raise to Art. So the committee may want to sort of sit and say, okay, this is what we're concerned
Okay.
about. And then I mean, I can, either you can take it to Art, you can give it to me, I'll send it back to Colette, however you want to do it. But it would seem to me that the adjustment that has to be made is, with Art, maybe it's someplace else as well, but.
And I thought we had at that point, when discussion wise, because I think that was the first meeting, the October meeting, when I was the new chairperson, that we felt it was okay for chairperson to reach out to a fellow chairperson and bring it up, and instead of like even going through liaisons doing it that way. I'll go back and look through my emails because I saved them all. I have a bazillion emails, so I know it's there.
Okay.
I just have to remember, and that way I can get his response back as to why he didn't think it applied. And then that'll also give us some discussion points then on, how to either redefine who's correct in their interpretation and all of that. So.
Yeah. And I'll send you what I have, and you guys will get back to me and decide how you want to proceed.
Okay. All right.
I'm all caught up.
Okay. Okay. Well, we've actually done a lot, and it's 3:16 now. Is there? Oh, wait. Now we have to. Let me pull up. Okay. So Keith, now we're up to you and the governance document here. So thank you for putting in the PDF so that I can easily pull it all up here. You tell me how you want to further this discussion.
So if I could, what I would like to do is to share my screen with the actual Excel document. And then that way, as we discuss it, I can just make the changes right on the screen and we can just move on from there.
Okay, so let me see. Let me see if I stop sharing on mine. Do you see the share button? Yep. Okay. There you go. Okay, so yours should be up now.
So can you see it?
Yep.
All right. Yeah, I think this will just be easier for me anyway.
That's perfect. No, that
don't go anywhere, Steve. This is for you.
You're right back.
Well, so the very first one here, Book of Resolutions, and we're probably going to have to wait for Steve to get back, but the majority of the actionable items in here are for Steve.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. All righty.
All right. There's a computer screen in front of me. Okay, got it.
Okay, so a bunch of these are very similar in reading, which essentially says new board liaison, and that's code for you, Steve.
All right.
To resubmit or to submit, yada, yada, yada. So, so number one, B01 Book of Resolutions, the last action was for the new liaison to resubmit our red lines to the board for a first reading.
Right. I had a bunch of them put together. Here we go. What I've got, I've got some resolutions. Hold on, let me see there. Okay, here, yeah, okay. I have a draft of B01. that is redlined as it applies to 4D, legal review. And then there's some resolution amendment procedures that are attached as well. I don't want to cut anybody off, but I will tell you that what I have in my possession is a red line for B07 dealing with petitions, a red line for B01 dealing with the Book of Resolutions, and I believe a red line dealing with financial reserve accounts, which is F03. I do not have charging documents or anything else relating to anything else. And I noticed when I started to thumb through this document, when I saw it, I guess yesterday, it appeared there had to have been, I don't know how many, 7, 8, maybe more, where the new board liaison is supposed to submit something to the board.
Right.
I have no problem in submitting stuff. I don't have it. And my best guess is that this is a series of these that have fallen through the cracks between the election, the change in liaisons, and the change in committee chair. And it doesn't make a difference where I just don't have them.
Once you were elected and then you became designated as our liaison, did Colette give you a file?
No. And let me be, I did not ask her for one. I'll do that. I'll ask her if she has something. But no, she did not give me anything.
So maybe that is the first step for you to see if Colette has a pass down of some action items, because really what should happen is she should brief you on what she's done with these.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Yeah. If I had to guess, my guess would be that sometime between August and maybe October, I'm not quite sure. You know, Jim knew he was phasing out. Colette knew she was probably going to give up the committee, and they sort of said, "Okay, send me everything, and then I'll pass it." One or the other said they would pass it on. So let me touch base with Colette, and I will, if she, whatever she has for me, I will get, and then I will tell you what my inventory is. How's that? Will that work?
Okay. And then I can go through the flash drive information that I have from Jim and see if there's anything that I have that you don't have that I can get to you, or that'll tell us if we have to create a charging document then.
Yeah, I don't really want to, I mean, Keith, if you need to do it, you should do it, but I really don't want to take up everybody's time today, because my answer for almost all of this is going to be exactly the same. I don't have what this says.
Okay, so I mean, that makes it easy for me, because I'll just go through and add a new line that says that you're going to go back to the former liaison and look for, you know, some action taken records. So let me just go through this real quick and see if there's anything other than that. So I updated B08 while we were talking to essentially say that we've received a charging document from the board to readdress this issue. Right. So that's the latest on B08.
Okay.
I updated CL1 Committee General to say that we're going to wait for a board charging document for red lines from the Executive Council Work Group. That doesn't change. I updated animal control to say that the new board liaison is going to discuss with the board to determine way ahead, which is basically what we talked about.
And Laura's going to give me a clean copy to work with.
Yep.
All right.
Let's see, was there any others? Oh, and I updated MO8 to say that we were briefed by Doug and we agreed to discuss and redline something to send back to the board. I said next meeting, but that was before I found out about the tasking for,
The retention and all that.
yeah, so maybe I just delete next meeting.
Yeah.
And so those were the only ones. So everything else on here, I'll just go in and add a general comment. And then what I would recommend, Steve, is that you just take this document and go sit down with Colette and say, do you remember, what do you got on this? What'd you do with it? And see what she can share. She was very good about
Right.
moving this stuff and taking action on it.
Yeah.
So I would find it surprising if she didn't
If
have.
you don't have something, yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
I agree. And I, by the way, I'm not fixing blame. I'm just saying I think it fell through the cracks.
No, it's all good. All good.
By the way, I have C09 as basically a charging document to go up to the board for January. I've already set that one aside.
Okay. Okay. One other one here I just noticed. Let me just scroll through this real quickly here. All right. So this one, C14, Racket Sports Advisory. Laura, you were going to email the C14 chair, just in courtesy, that
Oh,
the document was
That it's up.
up for review.
Was that one C14 you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Just, and oh, by the way,
Yours is up for review here. Should I
Well,
send them a copy of it and just say, if you don't know
Uh,
what it is, or should they should have it, right?
yeah, it's their resolution. I'm sure that they have it.
Okay.
And its due date is December 22nd.
Okay.
And, again, that's like we discussed about before, it doesn't have to come through us. We're just providing the accounting for it, right? So theoretically, they could draft a thing up and send it to the board.
Right.
And if the board wanted to send it to us, they could. Or if C14 says, do you guys mind looking at this? In the past, we've said, yeah, we'll be happy to look at it for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I will take care of that one. I'll email the chair for them and let them know.
Yeah, I think that was the only other one, and all the rest of them are the ones that Steve was talking about that he needs to get a pass down from
Right.
Colette on.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Well, I'll see you tomorrow, so I'll talk to you then.
Okay, so let's see. I'm going to stop presenting. All right.
Okay. We lost Keith's picture, though. Are you still there, Keith? I don't know. Did he disappear on us? He stopped, literally. No. Okay, so that should, because we did the governance document review. So just as a reminder then, our next committee meeting will still stick with Friday, January 13th from 1 to 3. We we can try for a hybrid, whoever can meet in person will meet in person. And if you're not able to meet in person, we'll still have the Teams link up as usual, unless something happens and everybody gets sick before then, and then everybody will be virtual. Okay, so hopefully, Mr. Augie, you're feeling a little bit better. You must be if you were festive enough to wear the hat for the whole entire meeting. So,
I'm doing great. Last day of quarantine.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So now everybody needs to stay healthy for the holiday weekends, right? That's what we kept saying. I hate to say this, before our son's service, the whole week before, I'm like, everybody, please just stay healthy so that you can be there, So, but anyway, so our next meeting will be Friday, January 13th. We'll have to relabel that room as the blue room now, not the peach room. And is there anything else that needs to be discussed?
I typed up notes and I'll send around a draft
Perfect.
minutes
Perfect.
at some point.
Thank you. Thank you. Otherwise, somebody want to make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you. Any second?
Second.
Thank
Second.
you. Any discussion? All in favor of adjourning at 3:30, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful holiday season. We'll be passing some emails around in the next, couple of days and weeks and stuff. So, but otherwise, thank you for joining us today, and try to be as festive as you possibly can. And I will see you all visually in January, next year. I'll see you next year. Okay.
Happy.
All righty. See you later. Bye.